Welcome everyone to this 9 a.m. talk. My name is Maxime Sanglan-Charlier. I'm a Belgian consultant, trainer, facilitator living in France. I'm working for a company called Ardling, and I'm quite into domain-driven design, architecture, and I'm a Niven Storming early adopter as well. I'm also co-organizing a conference in Paris, New Crafts. You can go to ncrafts.io to have some more information. We started to announce our first speaker, and this includes Mr. Kent Beck, so we're quite excited about this edition. We have great workshop as well. You can have a look. It will be on May 25th and 26th. I'm also part of the virtual DDD team, so that's a website where you can go with virtualddd.com, and you will find a lot of different videos and interesting stuff about DDD. And I'm also a DDD crew contributor, so you can find me on Twitter and Mastodon on those handle. Nick, to you.
Hey, I'm Nick. I recognize some faces in here, so good to see you again. Lots of new faces as well. Similar to Max, I work as a consultant in the space of architecture, domains, teams in that area. Unlike Max, I'm not crazy enough to organize a conference, so yeah, that's one thing that differentiates us. I'm also the co-organizer of a meetup. That's about my level. Meetups, meeting up once a month, yeah, I can do that, but all that organizing stuff, not my thing. So if you're into these topics in this talk and you want to learn more, you're always welcome to come to the meetup. And we're always looking for people to share their experiences around these topics. So yeah, always happy to host you. But let's talk about today.
Yeah, so if you want to have independent teams with fast flow in your organization, they will need to work on a loosely coupled software architecture. Because if all your teams are working on the same big monolith where the code is a tangled mess, well, they might not be that autonomous or fast anyway. So, but that's not the only thing that you need to have. Actually, the software architecture also needs to have loosely coupled subdomains, and so you will first have to identify those different boundaries to have your loosely coupled subdomains, and then your architecture will be aligned to those subdomains. But Nick, can you tell us a bit more about this, how to reach that fast flow?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the companies we work with nowadays have read a book called Team Topologies, and they're interested in this stuff called value streams and stream-aligned teams and all that space. But there's a little bit more to the picture than that, as Max was talking about. This is kind of the ideal vision, what we want to get to, and here are the different pieces that we need to have in place to get there. So a value stream is basically a sequence of steps a team goes through to identify new product features and ideas in a particular subdomain and deliver those as working software in production, adding new features to the product. And there's this concept of fast flow that everyone's talking about nowadays. What that basically means is people can get their work done easily and not be blocked. So it's quite a simple concept, really. So we just need to get these things aligned up. If we can define our domain boundaries well, teams will be able to implement new features without requiring coordination with other teams, which we know is expensive. In addition, we want each team to have some specific outcomes they're working towards, normally connected to a product North Star. So before team topologies, one of the common approaches is what's called a feature factory. Management has an idea, someone outside the team has an idea, the team's given some requirements, and the team builds to specification what they've been told to build. In this modern approach, it's the teams themselves deciding what to build, shaping their own product roadmap. And then the fourth part at the end, as Max talked about, is the software. For teams to have fast flow, they need to be able to take those ideas they've found in their area of the business, in their subdomain, and to be able to make those changes in software without the coordination. So if all of these things are aligned, we can get to that nice world of fast flow. Just one caveat, really. It's never possible to have this perfect scenario where every team's perfectly independent and they can make every single change without talking to other teams. What we're trying to get at here is to reduce as much of the coupling as we can to have the best flow possible. I do sometimes end up in situations where people feel like this is achievable across the whole company. Like I was in a workshop around about July last year, I think it was, and I was helping these teams. There were 4 teams working together, and one of the developers said, well, I'm working in my team, and my team's got our objectives, but I've also got this other team who needs us to make some changes for them. How do I prioritize my work? And I said to him, well, that's one to think about your product strategy. Maybe let's talk to the CEO of the company. It was quite a small company, so not huge. So we got the CEO in the room, and we said, what's the top priority here? Focus on what the team's doing or help the other team to achieve their goals. And the CEO said, you should reorganize the software and the team so that there are no dependencies and this problem doesn't exist. So that's not really achievable, but we can make some big improvements by crafting our boundaries well and making sure our software is aligned. So just setting some expectations there. And how do we get there?
Yeah, so that's what we are going to talk about. So first of all, we need to identify those domain boundaries, and we will do that and explain how we can do that with event storming. Then we'll try to refine those boundaries and make sure they are realistic and they fit with our domain, and we will show you how to do that with domain message flow modeling. And then at the end, we'll try to validate those using the bounded context canvas. So that's the talk structure today. Please.
Yeah, and so we thought since there are 2 of us, we can try and bring some role play into this talk to try and give a sense of what this might look like in reality. Obviously, an oversimplification. Right, I'm the CEO. So we've had our recent quarterly catch-up with the board. We've looked at the landscape. We've been using a technique called Wardley mapping, not covered in this talk. And we can see lots of competitors moving into our space. We're going to have to start innovating much faster now. We haven't been going quickly enough. And it looks like we're going to need to double the company in the next 5 years, double our revenue in the next 5 years.
What?
So we're looking at you as the CTO to get us on the right tracks, bring us back to the level of competition we need to compete in this industry.
Sure. But you forget that we have a big monolith right now, and that will be quite hard maybe to have those.
Great speaking to you. I'll speak to you soon when you've made some progress.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Thanks a lot. So, well, I definitely need to go see my principal engineer to see if he has some good ideas. So we have to double the revenue within 5 years. What's your thoughts about it?
So I'm the principal engineer now, the CEO's gone. We could have picked someone in the audience as a third person.
Yeah, sure. We can do that.
Maybe next time. So principal engineer, you said we need to double the revenue in the next 5 years. It's going to be difficult. You'll be lucky to deploy the monolith once in the next 5 years. I'm really not going to see how this is possible from where we are right now. It's looking like a big challenge.
Yeah, but they are very, very serious about it. So, well, we really need to accelerate the way we develop things. We need to increase our velocity a lot to meet their expectations. So, if you have any ideas, I'm all ears.
I know what you're saying, boss, but we've got a team of developers who've been working in this monolith, making small bug fixes and small BAU improvements. And now you're saying we need to completely redesign the whole business, break it apart.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we can get to that high velocity you're talking about with the way we currently work and think. We need to, the ideas just don't seem to exist in the company right now.
All right. So I might have an idea to start with. I just read the Team Topologies book when, they are speaking about those streamlined teams. Working independently with fast flow. So I think that would be a good start, a good starting point. So how can we get there? Do you have any ideas to get there?
Well, I mean, the Team Topologies book has a lot of great ideas. The concepts in there make a lot of sense, but the challenge is how do you get there? That's what we need to focus on here. How do we get there? But I have heard about this thing called the DDD crew. It's something on GitHub where there's lots of ideas and resources and blog posts and things. And they recommend we should use a technique called event storming. So I'm going to go talk to my team, and we're going to try some event storming and see where we end up.
Cool. Let's do that.
Okay. That's going to be the first section of today's talk. We're going to talk about how to find domain boundaries with a technique called event storming. Just a quick survey. Anyone here done event storming before in your company? Okay, a few people. Well, we'll cover the basics, and then everyone will be able to follow along. So firstly, a very simple starting point. Event storming is simply orange Post-it notes. But there are a couple of important rules, and if you don't follow these rules, you'll upset some DDD people. The first rule is it's timeline from left to right, and the second rule is it has to be phrased in the past tense. So located near a scooter on the app, that's something that happened in the past tense. We're telling a story that happened in the past. So we have this timeline from left to right, we have all of these domain events, and we can have different flows, things happening in parallel, options, but it's not a flow chart. We're quite specific in the details. We're not at a very abstract level. What makes these Post-it notes interesting, it's not the color, it's not that they're phrased in the past tense, it's that you bring all of your friends and you do this together. And your friends can be other people you work with who have the same job as you, but most importantly, people who've got a different job to you. In this example here, we've got that's my ear, and that's my hair. I think that my hair was a bit better cut then than it was now. But there's also a photographer over here. You don't need a photographer. That was just for this specific event, and they were having a special company get-together. But we've got developers, we've got testers, we've got product people, we've got customer success people. I think we had an accountant in there as well. That was interesting. We had an accountant in there. So basically, you bring all the people who understand the different parts of your business together, and you've got this very simple Post-it note, orange Post-it note format. And you can map out how your business works. You have lots of interesting conversations. People get to see different perspectives, people working in other teams, people who have different skills to you, and it all just comes together, and you build this. It's a bit of a mess. It looks messy, but it's not about the beauty. It's about putting all the knowledge together and building a clear picture. So the technique itself is very useful in isolation for a whole number of purposes. But it's when you want to start thinking about, okay, how do we organize our teams into these value streams with fast flow? And how do we shape our software so we can have teams working in different parts of the code, deploying independently and not tripping over each other? And that's where we can start to organize these events into clusters. So in this example here, this is from the domain of e-scooters, where you rent a scooter. Scooters on the street, scan the QR code and start taking a journey. So in this example, we've got an extract of the event storm here, and we've identified this high-level journeys domain. This is quite a big area of the company. And within that, we've identified 3 potential subdomains. I'm searching for a scooter. I want to take a ride. Where's the nearest scooter? We've then got the journey itself. This subdomain is responsible for everything that happens whilst you're taking a journey. You might want to start, you want to end the journey, you want to pause the journey, those kind of responsibilities. And then we've got ride completion, some things that need to happen at the end to finish the journey, trigger some next steps, check everything's working, stuff like that. So then, once we've done that with the event storm, those boundaries that we find, they're kind of a starting point. Event storming is quite high level, so we treat that as a starting point and not as a finishing point. Then we can apply these different checks. So here's an abstract example. Once you've identified a potential subdomain, we can start to give it a name, and we can give it a description, and then we can start to move into the next level of refinement, and we can check, do all of the events in here seem properly connected and cohesive, or are there some hidden domain concepts and potentially some hidden subdomains in here, or potentially this boundary we found is wrong? So Here's an example from a different domain. This is the pickup and drop-off subdomain for an online car dealership. So this subdomain's purpose is that once a customer has purchased a car on the website, this subdomain is responsible for ensuring that the car gets delivered to the customer's house and the old car is taken away. And by going through each of these events and applying these checks and refinements, we can get a quick idea of, is this a good domain boundary, or have we got some deeper issues or design choices to think about here? So in this example, picked up new car from the warehouse. Seems pretty related, I think. Connects back to the name, connects back to the purpose, looks quite good. Arrived at the customer's house. Yeah, it's this next step in the delivery process. Offloaded the car. Yeah, need to offload the car from the truck onto the customer's driveway. We then got 2 question marks. Gave the new owner a guide of the car. So if we think about this process, when we're delivering a car to a customer, yeah, we need to give them a guide of how it works. So it is part of this exchanging process. But it feels outside of pickup and drop-off. Pickup and drop-off has this logistics kind of feel, whereas giving an owner a guide of the car, we could imagine that there would be business rules and data that would care about these events together, but maybe not this one together. So at this point, we just put a question mark there. We're not going to try and find the perfect boundaries here. We're just looking for, identify some boundaries, start assessing it and refining it, looking for ideas at this point. And then once we've done that, we can start to apply some heuristics and different ways to find boundaries, looking for different possibilities. It can be very difficult for people who haven't done this before. In a lot of the workshops we do, people are like, well, what's a domain? What's a subdomain? Where do I start? I've got all these events, but I just don't know where to start or even begin. It can be overwhelming the first time you've done this. So there are some simple heuristics you can use to help start taking those first steps. This one here is very simple. If you're looking for subdomains in your domain, you map out your process, and then you consider each step in the process as a subdomain. Very easy starting point. It's not always going to be correct, but it's a nice, easy starting point, and very often it will get you quite close to some of your domain boundaries. The next heuristic you can then look at is, once you've identified those steps, you can look within them and say, is there anything common in those steps that feels like it might belong together? In this simple example here, we've got these 3 subdomains which each represent a step in the process, and we've got this notifications concept appearing in all of them. So we decide, yeah, it feels like that should be a separate thing. So we'll pull out this horizontal subdomain, and those other 3 can depend on this now. It's not always the case that this is correct, and it might be that in some situations, even notifications, you might want to keep it in those 3. It's all about looking for cohesion, which we'll get to in the next part of the talk, so I'm not going to go too much into that now. And then the opposite kind of heuristic is where you see the same concept in different places, as I was talking about, but you keep it, where we look for different semantics. This was something Scott Millett pointed out to me about 10 years ago. He said, you look for this concept in your business, but people talk about it differently. They give it a different name in different places. So in this example, a very common example, you've got some kind of user or some kind of customer. When you talk to marketing people, they're using the word lead. We're trying to get this person to become a customer, to sign up, to convert on our marketing campaigns. If you talk to someone in journeys, they call them a rider, this person on a scooter taking a ride. In both of those different scenarios, it's the same physical person, but we give them a different name. The way we talk about them is different. And that different name is indicating a different purpose. Over here, the purpose is getting them to convert. Over here, the purpose is getting them from A to B. And so these different ways of describing the same concept are giving us that clue that there are different purposes which can be organized separately.
Yeah.
All right, so Mr. CTO.
Yeah, well, I received a lot of excellent feedback from people involved in those sessions, those event storming sessions you've done, and it didn't take that long to arrive to have this outcome. So very great job. Continue.
Well, the first workshop was a bit some people were getting used to the idea, weren't sure where it was going. Some people weren't engaging that much, so it was a bit slow in the first workshop. We had a couple of architects who didn't really enjoy this collaborative post-it notes way of working, but after the third workshop, everyone was really enjoying it, and we've identified what our domain boundaries could be.
Could? What are you saying to me? I thought that it was it. You did some event storming and you had your domain boundaries. What is this? What's next?
Well, event storming is a very high-level technique. It's good for exploring possibilities, but it doesn't get into the low-level details we need to be confident that this makes a good software architecture and team boundaries. So, yeah, what we need to do now is we need to take these domain boundaries we've identified and we need to apply some reference use cases and think about which of those subdomains would talk together and which things might change together, and that will move us closer in the direction we need to be going in.
All right. So, okay, let's take some more time. So let's see how we can be more confident in those different boundaries we found. So right now, after the event storming sessions, as Nick said, we have kind of the first version of our boundaries, called it a draft. So yeah, we need to be more confident, and yeah, we don't want to start building our architecture based on bets on the future. Of course, we want to make sure that those boundaries are the right ones. So now it's quite a bit fuzzy still. So yeah, we need to test those different boundaries against real use case. So that's something already that has already been said by Eric Evans, the person who invented domain-driven design. So he created this whirlpool model of exploration in order to show to people how to build and to find out the right models for your design. But it totally applies to finding the right boundaries as well, because it's just about, well, first tell story, ask domain expert to tell story. So that's what they were doing during those event storming sessions, and then hearing those stories, you will collect reference scenarios, and that's really, really important, because then you will walk through those different scenarios and make sure that the boundaries you found are okay to solve this particular scenario. If not, you might have to refine those boundaries again and then experiment a bit. So that's why it's so those are cycles and refinement cycles again and again until you are quite confident in your domain boundaries. During those assessments as well, when you want to be more confident about your boundaries, you will think about the coupling. And Vladimir Kononov has a formula to calculate actually the coupling pain. And the coupling pain equals the strength multiplied by volatility and multiplied by the distance. And so the strength is how much effort you will have to make your components integrate all together. So there's a lot of different coupling here involved, implementation, model coupling kind of stuff. The volatility is how often things are changing in your different components. And the distance is how much cascading change you will have to handle whenever something is changing in your coupling component. So that's something really interesting for teams to keep in mind every time they will work on domain boundaries. And yeah, what is this coupling pain between those different components? So yeah, we spoke about this domain message flow modeling, which is a pretty easy tool to use whenever you want to make sure your boundaries are right. So you can find it on the DDD Crew GitHub repository. There's a lot of different open source resources there. So yeah, please have a look. So first of all, as Eric Evans said, you need to collect your reference scenarios, and then you pick one important scenario from these scenarios, and you will start to model the flow using domain message flow modeling. So you start with an actor or a system or a subdomain, and then you create the message that need to be sent from this actor or subdomain, and then you add the recipient and the connection line between those two, and you see how things are interacting with each other to fulfill the scenario, and you repeat until the scenario is completed. So seems quite easy. So let's take an example here. So this is an example where you're placing an online order when all items are in stock. So as I said, this is one of our key scenarios that we collected. And we start with a shopper, which is who is the actor here involved in this process. So first thing that the shopper is doing is that he places an order on the sales subdomain. And the sales subdomain is emitting an event order placed. And the billing subdomain subscribes to this event so that he knows when he needs to charge the credit card on the payment platform. So as soon as the credit card is charged, this billing subdomain will emit a payment collected event that will be interesting for the sale so that he can update this, the state of the sale. And of course, it will also be interesting for a notification subdomain that will then send an email to the shopper, back to the shopper saying, well, your order is placed. So that's how you can start modeling the flow of one particular scenario. And as soon as it's visualized, you can try to find out what might be the design issues or spot design smell that you might have. As a second step, you can also add the data that are the payload of those different messages. But yeah, first of all, yeah, just try to find out the messages. That's the first thing to do, and then the data. So as I said, as soon as visualized, you can have you can start you can start reading those different diagrams, and you can even ask different teams to come and to challenge your different IDs, and just showing them those simple diagrams, they can, as when you're reading code, I mean, when you're reading code, sometimes you don't have to understand it just to see that there are repeating patterns and stuff like that, so, or different levels of ifs or loops included, so that's the kind of stuff you can already, without having to understand the code, you can look at it and have those patterns visible. That's exactly the same here. You can have different patterns visible without having to know about the domain. So on the first example, you might be thinking that, well, whenever I do a command on this particular subdomain, it needs to make 4 different queries on another subdomain in order to make its job. So, well, is it okay? Wouldn't it be too slow, maybe waiting for each queries to answer? So yeah, that might be a design problem here that you can spot easily. On the second example, you might think that the subdomain in the middle is just passing by comments to another third subdomain. So is it useful? Is it not? So that's things that you can ask the team who came out with this design and challenge their IDs. One of the things which is quite cool with this tool is that it's pretty easy to copy and paste one of your diagram and make some changes and compare different options you would have. So here we have a discount decider that was on the first option, and then they decided maybe to remove it and to put the responsibility of decide whether we need to apply a discount or not, maybe in another subdomain. So you have different options here, and then you can decide the pros and cons of both options and try one first based on the feedback you will have from the team or other teams. Here's a case study from a company I worked with. They wanted to rebuild their accounting big monolith, and they've already decided to go first with this fixed asset module. So one of the key scenarios we identified for this fixed asset module is the fixed asset sales. And so we tried to find out what were the subdomains involved, and after their event storming, they came out with 3 or 4 different subdomains for this fixed assets module. And yeah, so it was really, really fine-grained, but as it's fine-grained, you see a lot of different messages. involved, and so yeah, they try to think about maybe make it a bit more simple. So they, as a second step, as the next refinement, they thought that, well, you don't have any revelation without having a sale. So those two things are really tied together. So we need to put it on the same subdomain. So they integrated the sales and the revelation calculation on the same subdomain. And as when they were thinking again and again, as a step 3, they came out with this, where they thought, well, actually, the sales is a behavior of the fixed asset, so we need to put this behavior and those responsibility in the fixed asset submodule and subdomain, and then the computing would be done in another subdomain where you would have the depreciation calculation and the revelation calculation. So you see, it's really refining those boundaries, and sometimes, well, you will have big subdomains that you would need to split because they are handling too much responsibilities, but sometimes it's the other way around. Maybe you will have two small boundaries, and you will have to maybe put those things back together to make a bigger subdomain. So in the end, well, this tool is pretty easy to use, and it will help you to identify the interaction and the dependencies between all your subdomains. And the thing is that you will really be more confident in those boundaries, because you will validate the boundaries you found through real use cases, and you will try to see how things are interacting to fulfill a particular scenario. So you will get at the end better defined boundaries, and that's what we want. So yeah, it will lead to lower coupling, and it will tell you how your systems communicate. So back to our role playing. So I'm still the CDO, and Mr. Principal Engineer, so how did it go? Did you finish all the flow? Is it okay right now? Can we start coding?
I think we've had some great workshops. I think we've got much more into the details. We can start seeing how those domain boundaries might turn into software boundaries. Got quite a strong idea on that. So I would say, yeah, we've got like an idea we think could work, but the team's still a bit uncertain at the moment. I think we're almost ready to take the first step.
Cool. So we can now maybe focus on the first iteration and start maybe coding something. That will be sending a great message to the board. They will be pretty happy to see that we're starting the new system. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a long journey. These things don't happen overnight, Mr. CTO. Let's not start promising too many things, but I think we're ready to start making the first step, breaking up that first piece out of our monolith. I think what we need to do is just bring the group together, reflect on the workshops we've had, put all the information in a clear place, and just, does this make sense? Let's do it. And I think I found a tool that can help us to do that.
Cool. What is this?
It's called the Bounded Context Canvas. It's a tool that helps you just to make sure that your domain boundaries represent a really tightly closed context.
Please go.
Okay, so that's going to be the final thing we're going to talk about today. It's a technique, as we talked about. It's a canvas. Just helps you to get from that fuzzy, we've talked about lots of things, to here's a clearer idea. Does it make sense? So as Max was talking about, with message flow modeling, we look at different scenarios, different use cases. We look at different coupling. And what we want to do now is try and end up with an overview of a particular service we want to build in our software, a particular part of our monolith. So the canvas has these different areas. I'm not going to go over them now and bore you to death, because that would be too much, but I'll give you a quick overview. There's also a new version of the canvas which has even more things on it, so nice little treat for you to look at in the break. So basically, what's the name? What's the purpose? Strategic classification is touching on how important is this to the business. And when we're making these transitions in our architecture, we don't want to spend months refactoring parts of the software that don't really have much business value. So that's about capturing the importance. Domain roles, I'm not going to talk about that now. It's a simple thing, but it's hard to explain. And then down the bottom here, we have messages coming in, messages going out, things that we did in message flow modeling. And in the middle, we have business rules and domain terminology. Effectively, if you've seen CRC cards from the 90s, it's kind of that, but with DDD terminology, the commands, events, and queries. So here's an example. We've got this booking service, and it handles all of the bookings, and it's highly customizable. So as we've laid all of these things out here, as Max was talking about, very often you can just see patterns. And in this example, we've got words like create, update, and delete. Those don't really sound like terms in add domain here. When I update an order, for example, what's the user trying to update on the order? The address, the price, the line items? Maybe there's some hidden domain concepts in there that would be better modeled explicitly. And this is also a warning sign that if you're planning to implement this in software, maybe you don't understand the domain well enough yet if you're not able to describe it more clearly. At the bottom, where do we start on this one? We've created a rules engine for the booking system. We wanted to give business all of the tools they needed to not have to wait for developers to make changes. But maybe that's a bit overkill here. Maybe there's a simpler solution than building this complex rules engine. So that's what's jumping out over here. And also, if we look at this as an overall perspective, maybe those two things can be separately. Whenever we create a canvas like this and we get these different clusterings, we can always ask, is that bit and that bit, could they be separate things? So then we start asking, are there business rules and data which are common across these flows down here and these flows at the top? One more example. This example is touching on naming. Naming's pointing us at something a bit more fundamental in the design here. We've got the word management. Now, the word management doesn't really exclude much. So anything can end up here. It's like your utils folder in your code base. And that's exactly what we can see here. We've got lots of different collaborators, and we've got lots of different kinds of messages. Over here, we're talking about get the location of a scooter and check out a scooter. Okay, that seems reasonably cohesive. We're then talking about forecasting and demand, and then we're talking about hardware errors down here. So too many responsibilities, basically, and when we put this all together, it jumps out at us. If we were trying to have this conversation, people might feel like fleet management makes sense, it's a good idea. It's not until you visualize everything that some people realize, oh, actually, it's a bit more complex than I thought. As I was talking about with naming, there's this really useful concept. I don't know who came up with this quote. If you find them, send them my way. But basically, generic names attract generic behavior. And specific names make it very clear when you've got a responsibility that doesn't live there. So in this example, we've got business property tax management. Anything about business property tax can live here. That word management doesn't exclude something, but the register does. That's a specific aspect. If we now talk about other bits of business property tax that wouldn't be related to the register, it would be obvious that they don't belong here. I should have picked a simple example for this one. And then finally, just some tips here when you map things out on a canvas. Here are some kind of things to look for, and you're looking at the overall design. So just a number of dependencies. If you've got lots of collaborators on each side, already that's just a warning sign. A lot of interactions here, a lot of coupling. Maybe there's something fundamental. And then challenge them. As Max was talking about earlier, there's a concept from Vladek Kononov's book, his coupling book. He's talking about the pain. So we can't remove every dependency, but if we go through each dependency on the canvas and we can assess what's the pain of this dependency, what's the strength, what's the volatility, and what's the distance of these two components, and then we can decide, we've got this service has 10 dependencies. These two are very painful. Let's redesign it to move those two, and we're happy to keep the other 8 dependencies. Logical ownership of data is an interesting one. So whenever you see a service that's getting data from somewhere else, always ask the question, should it be getting that data from that service? If you're trying to get the location of the scooter from the CMS, why are we getting the location of a scooter from the CMS? That should not be coming from that. We've got some weird design issues here. And then chattiness, whenever you've got 2 collaborators and there's lots going back and forth between them, like in Max's example with those 4 queries, again, that's something that can jump out to you and you can zoom into that further.
Yeah.
I think we're done, aren't we?
Yeah.
What else can we say?
I don't know. Loosely coupled software architecture, so that's the aim of all this. So the process we just thought about help you to define those boundaries. And you need to keep in mind that it's not a rigid methodology or any new silver bullet, whatever. You can adapt it to your context, of course, if you have other tools that you're already using within your team that aim at having the same kind of output. That, well, yeah, please keep on using them. There's a lot of different tools that you can see also on the DDD CRUB GitHub repositories. There's a lot of examples there, so please have a look. It's great. So it's an iterative process made of refinement cycles, so that where it's getting great is that, well, you work on that, you reflect on that, and then you refine it, and please also ask different teams to have a look to what you've done to so they can do some visual pattern reading and maybe try to find out different design smells or whatever in your design. So so it's really about getting deeper into the domain knowledge and also gaining more confidence in your boundaries.
Yeah, just to touch on one of those topics, one of the key, if all of this kind of stuff is new to you that we're talking about here, one of the feelings or one of the thoughts you might have, a lot of people have in this situation, is they're looking for a recipe. So you're telling me if I do event storming and then message flow modeling and then the canvas, then my monolith will be fully decoupled and we can just, that's it. But really, it's not about that step-by-step process. You can do these techniques in any order. You go from one technique to the other. I think the key thing is, as I talked about at the start, getting people together for those collaborative workshops. All of these techniques we've talked about are about the collaboration aspect. It's easy to use the word collaboration, but the reason it's important is because you want to have these ideas and skills spread throughout your company. Because we don't just simply go from a monolith to a decoupled software architecture. That's a very iterative process. We might get our boundaries wrong. So we want everyone who's working in this area to know how to use these techniques and to know how to use and to have these skills so that continuous evolution can happen. And when you use collaborative techniques, you spread the knowledge, you spread the skills, and everyone's able to be part of that continuous evolution process.
Yeah, and as our friend Michael Amashov is saying, is that you don't discuss anything that isn't visualized. So please, if you have different options to discuss, please copy and paste, make changes, and discuss those different things that you can visualize. So yeah, it's important to visualize stuff. A bunch of links that you can have a look to know more about all this. So yeah, we mentioned the DDD Crew GitHub repository. There's a lot of different repositories there, even storming cheat sheet. We talk about domain message flow modeling. We have this domain-driven design starter modeling process, which is a big, way bigger than what we talk about here today. The Whirlpool process of model exploration from Eric Evans, the latest DDD book released by Vladek Kononov, if you want to know more about DDD. So yeah. That's a pretty good read, and I think we won't bore you anymore. So.
Hopefully we didn't bore you too much. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming. We have time for questions, I think. Yeah, we have 10 minutes or 5-10 minutes for questions. If you have some, yeah, please come to the mic there. So it's recorded, and then it will be easier for everyone. Yeah, stand up.
Bounded context canvases. Looks cool, looks interesting. My concern is how documentation heavy will that end up making things, keeping in mind an agile way of not having tons of documentation. I'm going to step back down now.
Yeah, so the canvas, I wouldn't recommend that as necessarily a documentation tool. Some people do like to do that. It's mostly as a design tool in the moment. You might keep it as an artifact and say at this point in time, this is how we saw it. But yeah, I'd be very careful. Any documentation that you have to keep up to date manually and there's an effort involved, risk becoming out of date. You spend a lot of time documenting things. So I think all of the usual documentation rules apply. Wherever possible, any documentation that's informational, that describes the existing state of the system, we want to be able to generate that automatically. We're not quite there at the moment. There are some people who are working on that, and there are some tools in this space. So, overall, I would say, don't think of it as a documentation tool, maybe as a snapshot, as a point in time only, but mostly as a tool for getting people together and making a decision. Does this make sense? Should we implement it?
I would
even throw it away afterwards.
Yeah, I would add that, as you said, it's a snapshot, and that would be a great idea to put in your ADR if you are doing ADR architecture decision records. So whenever you take any decision about your architecture, you can trace that into a simple file, and you could do this snapshot of your bounded context canvas at this time, and then describe the situation in your ADRs, and you can see how it evolved and what was the context before when people took that decision. For those tools that, as Nick said, the only up-to-date documentation is always the code. So whenever you can build out your documentation out from your code, that's way better. So I would recommend to have a read at Living Documentation book by Cyril Martrer, and living documentation is really the way to go if you want to have up-to-date documentation that can be built up like when in your nightly builds or whatever. You can create your architecture diagrams, your specifications, whatever, if you take those recommendations from the book. Yep.
What time was it, by the way?
What time? The book?
No, now.
Now, it's 47.
Okay, yeah, we have time for a couple more questions,
Yep.
I think, if anyone has a question.
So, when we do the event storm,
Yeah.
do we capture the frequency or the chattiness, basically, the frequency and the volume of the events that we expect to happen? Is it better to capture it there, or is it better to capture data stages like the count stage?
Okay, so I'll replay the question. Your question was, when we're doing event storming, do we capture the frequency of events? And what was your example, sorry?
And the volume, so how many events are expected from between these two domains, or when we are capturing the event storm on the board, do we capture that information there, or do we actually defer it for a later stage?
Yeah, it's a good question. In general, when you're doing event storming, it depends on the level of abstraction you're working at. If you're working at a very high level, there might be a lot of details that you don't include. If you're doing an event storming for like 10 teams, you can't get into the details of every event that's relevant to all of those 10 teams. So what tends to happen is we do workshops at different levels, and there are different kinds of event storming as well. So a typical big picture, high-level session would help you to identify possible domain boundaries, and then you would have follow-up workshops to get more into the details where you flesh out things that weren't represented at a higher level, and you can even use process modeling event storming to get even further into the details.
But what Alberto Brandolini, the inventor of event storming, is also saying is that event storming is his pizza, but you can put everything on top. Expect pineapples. Sorry, Nick. And so if you want to put some metrics information, you could do that as well. So you can add anything you want that will add some value to your event storming. So yeah, please add those information, and we are pretty into that as well. So we have a color dedicated to metrics. Like when you have different paths, maybe it's important to know whether this edge case is only 5% of the case. Well, you might not spend that much time on it because it's not necessarily big. But if you're earning your money in those 5%, of course, that's the other way around. So yeah, please add those information to your event storming whenever it's valuable. Yep. Any more questions? Someone? Yep.
So, if you follow these techniques and split out part of the monolith to a subdomain, and then you realise you got it wrong,
You should expect to be wrong.
Cool. So, okay. So, are there other techniques that you would then use once you've actually got some code split out into a subdomain, or would you iterate over the techniques that we've seen here?
So if I understand you correctly, you've identified a potential split from the monolith, and the next step is how to break it out on a technical level, or...
So, I mean,
You've already broken it out, and you realize, oh dear, this isn't how we should have broken it out. Well, I think a lot of effort goes into like preventing that from happening where possible, but it does happen for various reasons. I guess one of the key things is thinking about the teams that are owning the different pieces and they're still working closely together. So when you first break something out, it always makes sense for the team that owns that new piece to have that ability to work with teams that still own parts of the monolith. So that's the distance we talked about in Vladik's formula. What's the distance between those two teams? If the monolith team's in one country and that team's in a completely separate country and they're not talking, they might not even feel comfortable to say we've made a mistake here. They're just going to try and make this solution work. Whereas if those teams work closely together on an organizational level, they're more likely to figure out how can we evolve things, how can we work closely together. Maybe something that we've taken out should be owned by that team. So as an organizational aspect, that's all I can think of really right now. Just, preparing to be wrong, making sure that if something does go wrong, the teams can work together and figure things out. Anything you're thinking of? You're asking about techniques, right? Specific techniques, perhaps.
I will try to go back to the Eric Evans' whirlpool model of exploration that's that one. Yeah, here, make mistakes. It's written down. So it's part of the process, actually. It's to realize that maybe you'll have some misunderstandings that leads to mistakes in your modeling. So that's why spending a bit of time on this and refining and try to find out boundaries, being more confident in those, it's way better. And it's way better to do that up front, of course, because as you said, whenever it's started, it's quite hard to change. But it's part of the process, making mistakes. So you need to be in an organization also that allows you to make mistakes and experiment, of course. Without it, it will be difficult, of course.
Yeah, a lot of companies do end up in that situation, the distributed monolith with microservices. I'm just struggling to think of, here's something very specific you could do to fix it. In general, we might want to go through this process again and figure out, based on what we know now, what would be the ideal boundaries. So these techniques would still apply as you're trying to figure out what's the right step forward.
Yep.
I guess the complexity is always going to be getting from your current architecture to the new one. That's always going to be the difficult bit, and will vary specifically on how you've shaped it, how your teams are organized, the tech stack you're using. So I can't think of too much in that space. That would be generic advice. But I think in terms of the techniques, you could reuse them to figure out, we've currently got this architecture that we feels wrong. We've got this one piece that feels wrong. How can we figure out what it should be on a conceptual level? Yeah, I can't think of anything else about that, sorry.
I think we're done. Oops. Yeah, 55.
Okay, thanks everyone. If you've got any questions at any point, feel free to email us and stuff. Always happy to chat, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
See you.